Hello and welcome to our first video on William Shakespeare's magnificent play, Hamlet. Now this is obviously one of the Bard's plays that has just come to be regarded as perhaps his masterpiece or his most enduring, most famous. It is certainly a complex play. It's one of his longest plays, and it is one in which we just see Shakespeare's genius on display in all of its brilliant majesty, just from scene to scene. So there's no way that you can give an exhaustive treatment of any of Shakespeare's plays or any great work of literature. That's what makes returning to it over and over and over again such a rewarding experience. But for our purposes, we'll do the best we can. We'll tag a couple of key ideas and significant themes and questions along the way. We'll look at some of the arguments and assumptions at work in some of these characters, and we'll just enjoy the depths and the reaches of Shakespeare's great mind. So for Hamlet, you have our cast of characters over here. Some of the main players would be, of course, Hamlet himself. He is the Prince of Denmark, and he is the heir to the throne of Denmark upon his father's death. King Hamlet, they share a name, but King Hamlet has recently died. And rather than Prince Hamlet assuming the throne, we have Hamlet's uncle, King Hamlet's brother, Claudius, usurping the throne. And we come to find out by the end of this act from the ghost of Hamlet's father, who returns and haunts the castle and eventually speaks one-on-one with his son, Hamlet. We find out from this ghost that Claudius is the serpent that did sting his father's life. As the ghost says, the serpent that did sting thy father's life now wears the crown. And so Hamlet discovers that his father's death was murder. Murder most foul, the ghost says. And so Claudius is now the king of Denmark, and Claudius has married Gertrude, the king's widow, Hamlet's mother. And so there's all sorts of intrigue already at court, some political turmoil behind the scenes. With this triangle between Claudius and Gertrude and Hamlet. We mentioned the ghost as well, who comes just a few pages into the play, actually. The play opens on this eerie night out on the guard platform of Elsinore in Denmark, and you have extra guards at post. That already there's this tone of, a mood rather, of suspicion, fear, eeriness, that there have been extra guards put on watch. This scene is often called the watch scene, Act 1, Scene 1. And we discover that these extra guards are on watch because there is a political threat from Norway with Fortinbras, which we'll discover in a later video when we get further into the scene. The king's chief advisor is Polonius, who's a rather comical figure, as we'll discover. And Polonius has two children. Laertes is his son, and Ophelia is his daughter. And both of them will play major roles in Hamlet's narrative. And primarily Ophelia, because she is the object of Hamlet's affections. And it's that love between them and the breaking of that relationship that leads some people at court, primarily Polonius, to think that Hamlet has gone mad. And his madness, as is famously known from the play, becomes a major contributing factor to the power of this play. Is he mad? Is he not? What is the nature of human consciousness and madness, especially when that human consciousness undergoes so much strain and trauma? We have Horatio, who is Hamlet's close friend. He's going to make an appearance soon, and he's going to have some pretty great lines in the opening act, and he will play a great role at the end of the play as well. And then we have Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are two fellow students of Hamlet's, who are summoned by the king, I think in Act 2 or so, to spy on Hamlet to see what the cause of his presumed madness is. And then there are a handful of other players that appear along the way. So like I said, we'll begin with Act 1, Scene 1, the watch scene, where we are outside the castle in Elsinore. We're on a platform. Where these guards are on watch. We have Bernardo and Francisco as these two soldiers, these two sentinels on watch. Before we get into the play proper, I wanted to just mention a couple of key ideas that we'll hang on to, a couple of handlebars for us as we move through this play. Again, there's no possible way to reduce this beautiful work to some flat reductionist reading of it. We want to let it work its magic on us rather than pin it down and ply it with a scalpel. But for our purposes in this series, we do want to have a couple of things to look out for, a couple of key questions or key themes and ideas to carry as we move along. So one of the first ones that I'd love for us to think about is how this is a play about playing. It's a play about play acting. Right in the middle of the play, we have a play within the play. That Hamlet will discover that there's this traveling band of actors that arrive at Elsinore, and he prevails upon them to put on a play, The Murder of Gonzago, for the king, for Claudius and Gertrude. And so right in the middle of this play, you have the characters of the play watching a play. And that sort of thing, that dynamic is going to make its way through the whole play and provide a lot of interesting insights and opportunities for us to interpret and explore even further. One of those will be the nature of hypocrisy. What does it mean to be a hypocrite? To wear one face to one group and another face to another. Nathaniel Hawthorne said once that one cannot wear one face for one group and another face for another without becoming confused as to which one is the true. That human beings are particularly good at play acting. In fact, the word hypocrite comes from the Greek word hypokrites, which just literally meant actor, one who acts, one who wears masks on stage in the ancient dramas, in the ancient plays. And so the question of hypocrisy, play acting, the difference between seeming and being, seems versus is. Hamlet, in scene 2, will have one of his earliest speeches where he is accused of, Gertrude says, why does your father's death seem so particular with thee? If every man's father dies, and his father before him, why does your father's death seem so particular to you? A rather callous thing to say to your son when he's grieving his father's death. And Hamlet responds, he says, seems, madam, nay, it is. I know not seems. And then he goes on to say, 'tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, that can denote me truly. It's not my black clothes and my crying that denotes me truly. He says, I have that within, which passeth show, these but the trappings and the suits of woe. So Hamlet himself will call attention to how things seem to be versus how things are. And so the nature of playing and mask wearing and acting and trying to discern who someone is, what something is, why something is one of the major questions of the play. In fact, at the end of this act, when he discovers his uncle is the murderer of his father, he'll say, one may smile and be a villain, which again alludes to this whole theme, that one may smile and yet be a villain. Also, this play traffics much in surveillance. Who is watching whom? So we'll have all sorts of moments in this play where the people who are speaking are being watched. Polonius eavesdrops on Hamlet and Gertrude later in the play. Polonius and Claudius eavesdrop on Ophelia and Hamlet as they're discussing one another, or as they're conversing with one another. And so the question of being watched and how that may or may not alter what you say or do. If you knew you were being watched, you might not reveal anything true. You might filter your language. You might alter your speech. And if you're altering your speech, then it's becomes more opaque and more obscure as to whether or not what you're saying is true. And so we want to watch that theme, the playing theme. Secondly, this is a play about questions. Hamlet asks over 500 of them himself. This is a play that establishes an interrogative mood right at the beginning. We'll notice that in a moment. The opening line of the play itself is a question, a very simple one. Who's there? So Bernardo, this minor character, kickstarts the entire drama with a question. And Hamlet will ask hundreds of questions. The most famous one, right in Act 3, right in the middle of the play, Hamlet is pondering to himself, and he says perhaps the most famous line in English verse. To be or not to be? That is the question. So the play is about questions, questions that have answers, questions that have difficult answers, questions that have no answers, and what the implications of that might be. But it's also a play about the question. Who's there? What is it? Why? What is this quintessence of dust, Hamlet says, when he's philosophizing about what a piece of work is a man, how noble in reason. So he's contemplating anthropology. What does it mean to be a man? What is a man? What is this quintessence of dust? Horatio will ask the ghost, when he appears, the same question Bernardo asks of Francisco. What art thou? Horatio says to the ghost, who usurps this time of night? Who's the king of Denmark? Claudius? Prince Hamlet? Who killed the king? Was it Claudius? Was it Claudius and Gertrude? Was she complicit? What happened to King Hamlet? Is he a ghost in purgatory? Is he annihilated? Is he dust to dust? Is he a body eaten by worms in the ground? So a play about questions. We want to follow those, not just the interrogative mood in the play as these characters ask questions of one another, but also the question, the metaphysical question. Hamlet will chime on that when he tells Horatio, there are more things in heaven and on earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. There's more. And if there's more, what is it? Is there a God? Is there life after death? That's the contemplation of Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil? Thirdly, this is a play about filial obligations. And that's a phrase that Claudius will use in Scene 2, that the son of a deceased father is bound in filial obligation to grieve for a certain term. And so filial obligation just basically means the duty of sons to their fathers. What duties do sons owe to their fathers? And so, of course, that's at work in this play, where you have all sorts of sons and fathers. You have Hamlet wanting to revenge the death of his father. You have Laertes, later in the play, wanting to revenge the death of his father. When Polonius is slain, Laertes goes on this big revenge kick. And then the threat from Norway is also a revenge threat, where Fortinbras is hot and bothered, wanting to revenge his father's death. And so Shakespeare is doubling and even tripling this theme when he's talking about these duties of sons to their fathers. But the implications go beyond just these particular characters. What are the implications, not just on family life, of the obligations of a son to a father, but what about civil life? The obligations of citizens to their government, of the people to their king. What are those obligations and duties? What about religious life? What are the obligations of parishioners to their pastor? What are the obligations of mankind to their heavenly Father? So the question of duty, especially when duty conflicts with desire. What if our desires are in tension with our duty? This is an age-old literary theme. Shakespeare's going to work it to magisterial effect in this play. And then finally, for this video at least, I want us to think about this play as a play about providence. especially when we get to Act 5. The Hamlet we see in Act 5 speaks quite differently from the Hamlet before. He says there was a special providence in the fall of a sparrow, quoting from Matthew, the Gospel. And so the nature of fate and free will and human choice and the consequences of those choices, these issues are going to play a major role as well. As I said, we'll talk about the difference between art and reality. This goes back to the seems versus is question, especially when we get to the play within the play. Talking about the soul and the body. What exactly is man? Is he just a body, or is he a soul and a body? We'll talk about parts and likenesses. Those two words are used, repeated quite frequently in this play. The idea of parts of a man, parts of the truth. The likeness of a thing versus the thing itself. Again, going back to this theme. So let's look at this opening scene. So as we said, the play opens with these guards on watch, and the very first line is a very simple two-word question. Who's there? And this, of course, introduces the first of many, many, many questions in the play that establishes the epistemologies at work in this play. Epistemology being the study of how we know what we know. What is the nature of knowledge and what is the nature of truth? Because if we live in a world of seeming, if we live in a world of actors, hypocrites, if everybody is putting on filters, especially if we think of the internet age where everybody is able to project a certain version of themselves, how authentic is it? How do you really know somebody if they are constructing or fabricating a persona for you? T.S. Eliot, in his poem *The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock*, talks about how we craft a face, we build a face to meet the faces that we meet. And so if that's what everybody's doing, then how would you know who the person is across the table from you? How would you know who the person is next to you in bed? How would you know who the person is teaching you? Who the person is governing you? Who the person is promising things to you? As we know from the Gospels, Jesus himself was betrayed by somebody close to him. Of course, Jesus in his omniscience knew. But that notion of asking who is there and not necessarily knowing if the answer you're receiving is the truth. What if this person is merely presuming? What if this is camouflage? What if this is some smoke and mirrors illusion and I'm speaking to an actor? And so that question establishes this sense of fright and anxiety, suspicion, nervousness. And we have the difficulty of discovering the truth. Remember, Pilate asks Jesus that question, what is truth? And so the question of who's there becomes this paradigmatic one that we'll return to over and over in the play. Because Hamlet is not going to know who's there when he's speaking to the ghost. Is this a goblin damned who puts on a pleasant face to entice me to hell? Is this ghost merely a devil that is appearing in the form of my father in order to convince me to commit regicide and kill the king? Is this my father's spirit returning to me? Is Claudius the murderer that the ghost has told me he is? Or is he innocent? And how would I know? That leads us to Hamlet's attempt to put on the play to elicit some sense of truth of who Claudius is. He says, the play's the thing, wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. Is Gertrude who she presumes to be? Is Hamlet who he presumes to be to us? At the end of this act, he'll tell Horatio that he's going to put on an antic disposition. He's going to put on madness. But the question throughout the whole play is whether that madness that he's exhibiting, is it true? Is it not true? Who is Hamlet? Who's there? And so that question is one that we need to pin down and just return to often as we seek to understand who Hamlet is and what the story is that he's telling and that Shakespeare's telling. So Bernardo asks the question, "Who's there?" to Francisco, presumably. And Francisco says, "Nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself." So notice the tension here. There is this spirit of fear. Bernardo says, "Who's there?" And Francisco says, "No, you answer me. Who are you? Stand and unfold yourself." That idea of unfolding yourself is a key phrase that's going to appear many times. We'll see it when the ghost appears to Hamlet. He says that I could unfold a tale that would harrow you to your bones, that would terrify you. At the very end of the play, Hamlet tells Horatio to tell his story, to unfold it. So the idea of unfolding yourself is an interesting verb for Francisco to use. It reminds us of this inwardness that we see in human nature. To have yourself unfolded implies that we are already folded. We are folded selves. We are closed, guarded, and need disclosing. That the people you see around you are all, in this assumption, folded up. They're all clothed. They're covered. They are hiding behind a manufactured, outward-facing social persona where the true man might be difficult to ascertain. And so this is the difficulty of discovery, the difficulty of finding out the truth. If the truth is buried beneath a bunch of makeup, a bunch of costume, a bunch of mask, a bunch of falsehoods, then we, in order to know someone, they must unfold themselves. And so that's Francisco's imperative, is for Bernardo to unfold yourself. Hamlet will need Claudius to unfold himself and to reveal whether or not he's guilty. And in fact, one of the things Shakespeare will show us in this play is that we in the audience need to be unfolded. That the power of plays, as we'll discover in this play, is that plays are able to draw out the truth through a fiction. It's the lie. Fiction is the lie that tells the truth as it goes. Polonius will talk about that, where with a, I think he says, with a bait of falsehood, we'll catch a carp of truth. And it's that same idea that with a play or a story, you're able to cut to the quick of a man's heart. You're able to strike at the very core of his being. Nathan does this to David in the Old Testament when he is called, he's summoned by God to expose David's sin with Bathsheba. And rather than confront him openly, he tells David a story. And Nathan tells him this story about the same sin that David's guilty of. And David responds with some emotional rage. And Nathan says, "David, you are the man. This story's about you." And it exposed something that David had folded that needed unfolding and needed confession and repentance. And so that brings us again to the nature of sin and evil at work. This is a play about the nature of evil in many ways and how it can be hidden. There's something rotten in the state of Denmark, and we've got to discover what it is. We have to unfold what it is. But this folded up, closed nature of man is a consequence of the fall. All the way back in the Garden of Eden, right? That once we fell, we discovered our nakedness. We saw our true selves and were ashamed of them. And so as a consequence, we needed to be clothed. We needed to be covered. We needed to be folded up and closed, folded under fig leaves in the Garden of Eden. And so now human nature is no longer exposed to one another. We're no longer true to one another. We are no longer our naked selves. So we are all covered in fabricated, woven suits of these outward-facing characters that we craft for ourselves. So who's there? Nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. Long live the king. Bernardo? He. You come most carefully upon your hour. 'Tis now struck 12. Get thee to bed, Francisco. For this relief much thanks. 'Tis bitter cold. and I am sick at heart. Another telling line from Francisco. The nature of the external elements, the weather, the climate at Elsinore, is an indicator of the internal climate at Elsinore. That because of the nature of the atmosphere and the setting, we're able to determine something about the nature of the drama. In other words, what's happening outside the castle walls is a good indicator of what's happening inside the castle walls. And Francisco tells us that essentially it's bitter cold and I'm sick at heart. So because of this, it's cold, it's night, it's tense, and I'm sick at heart. So the corruption that's happening externally and the external world in turn produce an inner response to the calamity of the external world. That's the sense of the right harmony with the universe. We need to be taught to feel correctly. Wuthering Heights, that great novel by Emily Bronte, does the same sort of thing, that our internal selves correspond with the external selves, which is the exact opposite of hypocrisy, where the internal self and the external self don't correspond. And so we're going to see the need for the corrupted rottenness in the center of Denmark to be exposed so that the land can be healed, so that justice can be done. Otherwise, we're going to have this conflicted dynamic between the way things seem to be on the outside and the way things seem to be on the inside, or the way things are on the inside. And so Francisco taps in on that his internal state is affected by the external state. And so when we get inside the castle and we see all the corruption at court and we see the drama of the play unfolding, we recognize that as long as there is a divide between the external and the internal reality, things will never be well in Denmark.